I found that, one of my best gains were coming from those individual engagements,
Mhm.
and talking to those individuals on an individual, walking the floor, sitting by a desk side with people. I thought their productive was probably really, really disruptive.
What?
But
Bill being disruptive?
yeah, exactly. Imagine that. Like, and I always quickly developed this caricature of me being the Kool-Aid man, right? Kicking down the door and screaming, and making a bunch of noise. But that's what's like, hey, that individual interaction, even at the ground floor level.
This is Craig and Andrew, two Ranger qualified Army officers with MBAs, here to help you improve your business through leadership.
Each week, we'll deliver easy lessons from the battlefield to the boardroom on how to improve team performance. If you're a leader or want to be, this is the place for you.
Welcome to the cohort.
Disclaimer: the views in this podcast are those of the authors alone and do not represent the views of the Department of Defense or the U.S. Army. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Command Post Cohort. I'm Andrew.
Hey, you got Craig here.
And today we have got a great show for you. A special guest, one of my best buddies, Bill Helmsing. He is the co-founder and former COO of Apptronic, now valued at $1 billion, and now of Iron IQ, which is a software as a service company for oil and gas companies. So really interested to find out what SCADA means, Bill. I can't wait to hear about it. So Bill, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'll jump in, and Andrew, Craig, I appreciate you inviting me on and bringing me on. Got ready for a pretty good time here. So I think, Andrew, kind of your point, I think we could talk about SCADA. Yeah, to quick background on me, I graduated from West Point in 2007. Right after that, joined the Army as you're required to do. Joined as an infantry officer, and was with the Army, active duty Army, for about 8 years after that. And I think my first duty station was Fort Wainwright, Alaska, and that's where I linked up with Andrew when he was stationed up there with us. And we had a lot of fun up there crawling around central Alaska and thinking we're good fishermen and mountain climbers. No, so spent some time up there in Alaska. I was a platoon leader for infantry platoon up there. I later moved on after a couple stops to Fort Drum, New York, with the 10th Mountain Division. When I was there, a couple more deployments. I was a logistician and also a security force advisory team leader that we deployed to Afghanistan as part of a advisory group over there. And then later, once we got back home station at that deployment, I did company command for a rifle company there, and did that for about 15 months. And then shortly after that, I wanted to try to jump in the great unknown of the civilian workforce. And so I got out of the active duty Army, joined the reserves, and then and started my civilian career. And that was back in 2015. Yeah, and then quick cap after that, I think in 2015, I met my wife then. She was just getting on into the Army as I was getting out. So I immediately signed on to become a military spouse, and followed her down to Fort Hood, which is, I think, Fort Cavazos now, down in Central Texas. And so that's how we ended up in the Central Texas area. And I know I wanted to go to grad school, and then you guys would appreciate this. What does every officer do when they get out of the Army? They go to business school. Well, I was going to be different.
Yep.
Right. So I was going to be better than everybody else. And so I jumped onto the mechanical engineering graduate program at UT Austin. Not a great decision. Worked out for me. I was struggling early on, but I was quickly on academic probation. And but anyway, while I was there, is during that crucible, I met a couple other individuals. Nick Payne, a postdoc researcher there, and also Jeff Cardenas, who was working with University of Texas and completed their entrepreneurship, our Master's of Science in Technology Commercialization down there. We joined up, and Nick had this idea for a great robotics company, and we joined up and put this company together. And I stayed with him for about 7 more years, growing and building that company. And then into 2022, beginning of 2023, kind of had a life decision point. I needed to get back to Western Colorado, where I grew up, and Apptronic was just getting ready to close a pretty massive seed round of funding at that time, and they needed an operations leader that was going to be on the ground every day, helping them navigate that. And I needed to kind of get home and be with family, so left Apptronic all on good terms, and then while I was down here, I linked up with Iron IQ, and they needed a COO in the tech field, and I was able to join them and jump from one startup right into another. And so I've been with Iron IQ for the last couple of years. So long narrative, but that's the runs around the world where I'm at now.
There's a lot of good things in there.
Yeah.
And I guess you just like cold places, huh? Is that what it is?
I hate the heat more than I like the cold. So that's I think we were not sad to leave the Texas weather. Texas
Yeah,
itself was pretty awesome, but yeah, we're happy to get out of that. So
fair
yeah.
enough.
Yeah, we appreciate you joining us, and really curious to hear your thoughts on making that transition from Army officer over into leading a civilian company and what that was like, because I think that there's a lot of times transitions are difficult on the individual level, but when you're doing it as a part of an organization and from a business aspect, what was that like as far as leadership, the challenges or maybe just differences? Maybe one was not harder or easier, but one, just the frictions that you experienced through that.
Yeah, no, great question, Greg. And I thought about it a lot, and it's just something to kind of reflect on. And when we first started getting Neptronic, it was three of us, smell each other's armpits in a very small office, and so the leadership challenges weren't there, just more about hygiene and get along with each other. And then, as that company kind of steadily grew over the next several years, and I kind of, grew with them, and all of a sudden stuff like leadership and beyond just peer leadership and stuff like that started mattering. You start building small teams and stuff like that. And so
Mhm.
quickly tested very early on, as we started hiring some people. And I think, one of the things you guys can appreciate too is that there is a stereotype of the military leader, right? The knife hand, the follow me over the hill, the
Yep.
screaming and yelling at push-ups. And we always got to be very careful to not like feed into our own stereotype, because those are tools that are in our tool bags and not the only tools that we have. But yeah, it's definitely something that you got to kind of fight that paradigm or fight that stereotype sometimes, and how you approach it. And I think, one of the things that was most striking to me early on is that, we're hiring very very small team, very very intelligent individuals, fresh out of grad school, maybe a couple of years industry
Mhm.
experience, and you have this very close knit relationship and dialogue with them, and you think about it, especially when I was coming out. I just got done with company command, you know 150 200 soldiers in that unit. You're leading them all. You got a lot of responsibility. When did you ever take time of your day to sit down and talk to a private and understand what their concerns are about the future and their
Yeah.
individual circumstances, or their feedback about the unit? Right, is all there's a very kind of strict hierarchy that you kind of respect, because you don't want to subvert your junior leaders, or there's also 150 of them. But I found that, one of my best gains were coming from those individual engagements,
Mhm.
and talking to those individuals on an individual, walking the floor, sitting by a desk side with people. I thought their productive is probably really really disruptive.
What?
But
Bill being disruptive?
yeah, exactly. Imagine that. I was like, yeah, I always quickly developed this caricature of me being the Kool-Aid man, right? Kicking down the door and screaming, and making a bunch of noise. But that's what's like, hey, that individual interaction, even at the ground floor level with your lowest level employees, I think, that bears a lot of fruit. And I think it's something, no matter what size the entity, I mean, you'll read it in all the organizational books. But that was something I kind of had to learn, because like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to subvert my junior leaders. I don't want to undercut them. I was like, no, I think you gain a lot from it. And I think, and the other side, I mean, you bring a lot of great stuff with you. And I think one of the, especially early stage startup stuff, one of the best kind of things that you bring over from a military leadership construct is this idea of creating a shared sense of purpose and vision, and a method of ends,
Mm.
ways, and means, right? And a strategy to get there, and being able to kind of communicate that to the lowest level, right? And so it might just be five dudes that are just, trying to make the startup happen, but being able to kind of sit there and speak clearly about where you're going, why you're going, because you're dealing with challenges every day. Um, and so that was something that, you develop in the military. I was able to kind of easily transition amongst other things. But yeah, when you kind of brought up your question, things I had to learn on the business side to kind of supplement my military experience, and then also some stuff I was able to bring to the other side. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think bringing over that purpose is key, because a lot of times I think it's easily left out of explaining the why and the purpose
Yeah.
of not just the short range but the long range too, because it's sometimes, I think, difficult to see what that long range plan is from an individual contributor level if you don't have a leader who's willing to take that time, and maybe it is on that one-on-one interaction that you described, to be able to explain all those things. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that's a very valuable piece that gets left out sometimes.
Yeah. So to me, that also speaks to trust, right? Because like in the Army and in the service, we, I think, take for granted that we can build rapport, build trust with everybody around us, subordinates and superiors alike. because we are with them most of the day, right? We start out at 6 o'clock in the morning exercising with them and leading them through that. And then, if we go out and do field exercises, we're with them, night and day, sleeping next to them, things like that. So, yeah, I did wonder, like, then how do you build that same in the civilian sector, right? And I think you're onto something there with going and sitting next to their desk, disruptive as it may
Yeah.
be for Bill.
Yeah. But great for me. I don't know about them, but yeah, I think hopefully it is two ways, right? Yeah, absolutely.
And so do you think doing things like that paid off?
Yeah, I think brought up another kind of thing when you guys talking about that. I think it's like, building that trust and that street cred. In the military, you kind of have, you got all your bells and whistles that you wear on your uniform, and your soldiers know you've been through these educational institutions and military schools and all sorts of stuff, and you kind of come up with a little bit of a resume. You wear your resume a little bit with the military, and it kind of helps
Yeah.
establish at least the initial picture of your bona fides. And I think same thing with the Army, and also in the, they'll take you through the first or second day for that initial impression, but they'll quickly spot a poser.
Yeah.
If you can't disassemble a machine gun in front of your guys, like they're going to know that what's going this guy doing. And I think the same thing with a small tech startup. Like these are all brilliant guys,
Sure.
brilliant individuals, right? And I think if you're just blowing smoke and you're actually just a Kool-Aid man and not bringing any benefit, and you're actually seeing that these are productive because this is what happens, or Bill may not know the deep dive of the technology, but through these interactions, he's starting to learn more and more and more about the technology, so he can actually make decisions and plans around that from the higher level. I think that's very, very relevant. So those same techniques in the military, man, like you got to be able to talk the talk, especially at that tactical. I mean, any level of leadership. Same thing exists on the the civilian side, that you got to show that you're bringing value because people sniff it out really quick.
Yeah, one thing that interests me about specifically the tech aspect of a company and working in that environment is how do you balance that innovation that you're looking for as well as accountability? Because, you hear a lot of people talk about things like psychological safety, and it's got to be
Yeah.
a place where people are willing to take risk and things. And I understand that that's needed especially in an industry where innovation is so critical. But what was your experience with trying to balance that out with also holding people accountable for producing outcomes and results?
Yeah. No, it's a great thought. We learned at my business school days, they talk a lot about, creating a safe space, and that can have a bunch of different meanings, but what I take from that is, like, you want to create a culture and environment where people are not afraid to voice their opinions, right? And you want that feedback, because it's like, if you see something, say something. If you see something about this robot that we're building that's screwed up, and you might just be the guy, you're the guy at the end of the assembly line. You just got to put this thing together, but you're sitting there watching the electrical engineer put a plug in a terrible spot that's going to take hours to do it. We want that to bubble up,
Yeah.
um, and we want to be able to create that environment where people are kind of free to criticize each other, but there's like rules, right? And I think, like, no personal attacks and stuff like that, it's never personal. It's all about the ends, and so I think kind of creating that culture where, on the tech side, or even if there's, environmental issues, or I have a bad leader or something like that, you want that stuff to bubble up to the top. And I remember even the last day, our CEO Jeff would have those one-on-ones with individual. He'd just grab people off the floor and come talk to them, and that's how he'd suss out problems. And he'd builders circle on the org chart. There's a problem here, and I go take a look at it. But I think that's important to kind of create that culture where people are free to say something, both on the technical innovation side and also just on, just the company culture side. And I think, you also say, like, balancing that with accountability. And I think that was like one of the amazing things that we did with Eptronic. And it wasn't me, it was just Nick Payne, our lead engineer, CTO there. He was just a brilliant roboticist, and world class, absolutely. But he created this culture of, like, demand for excellence, and he just kind of created a self-reinforcing mechanism where not only did he believe in, peer reviews and all this other stuff, and encourage people to voice up and speak opinions, even though it might not be in their specific field, but he did an amazing job of kind of creating this cohort and this culture, as well as some of the early employees that we brought on, just demanded excellence of our team, and that just brought everybody up. And so man, our engineering team was crack hot, man, and like you said, they just um, And my job as the operator is kind of establish timelines and tell them kind of where to hit and have my little Gantt chart, right? That's very pretty that I
Yeah.
brief the customer with. But, we had some great early individuals there that just kind of created an awesome culture that just demanded excellence of the team. And that was from, allowing people to kind of voice their opinions, encouraging feedback, having humility to even that I'm the lead designer. I want people to criticize my work and create that environment. So yeah, it's pretty awesome when you create.
I love that. The idea of the community of excellence, right? Yeah, that's what we want, right? That's the goal. Like, how do you drive towards that kind of thing without it becoming something that is negative? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if you say, hey, we're gonna have a community of excellence, there's always the potential that excellence is the only focus, right?
Yeah.
At the expense of safety, health, welfare, things like that. So how did you actually like enforce to all the other employees and that, hey, we want the feedback. We want you to criticize, right? Bring things up, how to reinforce that it's okay to do that in pursuit of the best product for the company.
Yeah, no, it's great because it can be, right? And I think,
Yeah.
I think Simon Sinek does it. Or, I mean, a lot of people talk about the brilliant a-hole, right? Of like the guy who's the best in his field, but he just destroys everyone. And it's really got to be a kind of self-enforcement mechanism. It starts with the front, Nick or anybody, because everyone kind of understood it. We kind of created this culture and we eventually codified it into a credo. So, we called it CHIPSy,
Okay.
of kind of this values that we hold dear. And I think in leadership they always talk about creating values, but they have to actually mean something, and it's something that you can live and point to. And hey, when somebody just destroyed somebody, a personal attack in a peer review study, like we would bring that person in and point to, like, hey, you are not humble here. You were, and being able to kind of self-correct that mechanism. So I think that's one of the things that helped. It started with the top of creating that culture. Monkey see, monkey do. I never saw Nick Payne or something like that destroy somebody in place in an unprofessional manner. And then also we did have the culture like, hey, if you're not integrating with the team, if you're actually being kind of a net negative, you individually might be a benefit, but you're dragging other people down. They don't like working for you. It kind of comes back to that culture where people were able to feed that feedback. It's like, hey, I can't work with this guy. Like, and they talk to their leadership and kind of work his way up. It's like, hey, I just can't work with this. He's screaming at people on the floor. He's creating a really stressful work environment. And you always got to do a full investigation, all of those others, not a formal investigation, but you got to kind of look it into it.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
this is someone who just an axe to grind. But I think it's like, it's one thing to talk, but you do kind of have those enforcement mechanisms because this demand for excellence can quickly boil over to a very toxic environment where three of the smartest people in the room just destroy everybody and no one wants to work there, and you're having a negative effect. So that's a great point, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah, that answered what I was about to ask you, was what role values played in that. And did you actually have a document, whether, some organizations use values or some type of creed or manifesto to solidify that we as an organization are going to hold these things dear and true, whether it be, do no harm or some way to address the legal, moral, ethical aspects that do come up just in the course of business. Those issues arise. And so I was going to ask you about that, but you kind of answered that saying that you did have
Yeah.
something built. How long did it take y'all to really recognize the need for that and see the value in placing something like that, directly speaking of values?
Yeah. Man, I can still remember doing it. And, this is something we later did with Iron IQ, but it was, well, I think we're less than 20 people at the time. And we knew we had something special going on with Eptronic. We're fighting through it, but we could see the stuff starting to come to life. And we just said, hey, like, we want to kind of create this manifesto or these values and stuff like that. And there's a bunch of different techniques of developing values and stuff like that. We just said, hey, everyone, give your top 5 things that you think are valuable to this company, that make the company unique, that drive us towards excellence, and all these other things. Like, everyone just email your 5 things. We essentially took them all and consolidated into a big list, and then we just created sticky pads and put them up all on the wall, right? And say, okay, let's cluster all these things into 4 or 5 nodes, and that some we can circle around and put a label on it, right? And that was a really, really awesome exercise because it was like bottom up fed, right? And so when we presented this document, it wasn't like, these are your values. Like, it is like, thou shalt be creative, right? It's like, hey, this is Bond.
Tell
This
Bill
is
he is handsome every day.
exactly. So no, I think that was one of the most awesome exercises, and I think at least when I left, is still something we said every day. Is Gypsy was the acronym for it, and I think that's something we can stand behind and kind of refer to, and I think it's really really cool because it's employee built.
Yeah.
But we kind of facilitated. All we did was put stickies on the wall and put it in a Word document and push print, right? But yeah, that was a really good exercise, and I think we always learn like, yeah, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. This is an exercise that again really was productive for the company.
Man, so the fact that it was employee built and led, I think is fantastic. But I think the really important piece of that is the enforcement of it, right? Because Russia has a Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they enforce it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So like the fact that you publish these standards, right? Standards of behavior and that you then enforce them, right? Because when when the Delta operators in the Army were first standing up, right? They had on the walls and no negligent discharges. That's where you accidentally fire a weapon. And one of the new guys in the very small element that was just the startup within the Army, he was an officer, a senior officer, accidentally fired his weapon. And everybody looked at the commander to see what would happen. He said, "Okay, you got to go." So, because that was the rule, right?
Yeah.
So I think, yes, you got to have that value chart, that guidance, those standards for behavior, and then you got to enforce them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think there was a guy by the name of Joel Trammell did another leadership course, and we talked about a little leadership training earlier before we started here. And I mean, he kind of hit on some of this stuff, and he's the one that got some of these juices flowing. It's like you got to say it so much. These manifesto, these values, these missions. You got to say it so much, but it almost comes cliche, right? It's like that's when when people are kind of joking around with it. Like they're not making fun of it, but like that way, it's not just sitting in the bathroom wall or the break room wall. You just got to keep hammering it just so to kind of instill it. And I think that was very powerful too. Yeah.
How long do you think it took to really instill those values throughout that organization? I guess it's probably a shortened timeline just based off you did that early on. You identified that need and addressed it early, but just curious what did it take to get to that point?
Yeah. Yeah, it's because I think, at least in our case, Craig, it was kind of already there. We just codified it, right? And I think it was,
That's
an
fair.
important thing that I think someone once told me too is that we hired that in when our first several hires were all engineers and stuff like that, and we hired that in. It kind of subconsciously hired people that kind of met and lived our values, and then later it was like, hey, like there's something going on here. Let's do this, and then we're going to kind of use this as a guideway for future hires and stuff like that. And so that not everybody can do that. No, a lot of times you're coming into an organization trying to create that. And so I think kind of the latter part of what I was just saying is like, yeah, it's one thing to talk about it, but put it on the wall, talking about it. I think we even found a way to kind of bring it into to our evaluations, our annual evaluations that we're doing. It's like, all right, let's list out the values. How did this individual live up to the values? And we also did kind of this peer review. I think the Army tried this for a while. They might still be doing it for field grades or something. We go, okay, we're going to the person that left, and if he thinks that you're just terrible to work with, he's gonna put it right here in the line and give them that opportunity. So there's a little bit, and I don't know if it worked perfect, but we just making that as part of like every single thing that you do, and eventually people are going to start taking rhythm, and especially the enforcement mechanisms or also the reward mechanisms. And I think the carrot's just as powerful or more powerful than the stick. Is like, hey, this individual, so great creativity. They found a unique solution that saved us X amount of time and money. A round of applause for this individual. So I think using the carrot definitely helps as well.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting to tie it into the performance evaluations because that's a way to really establish that not only is this a standard, it will be enforced, it is going to be addressed by leadership to make sure that we're maintaining this culture amongst ourselves. And so that is I think, an interesting way to, bring it full circle. And it's not just a motto on the wall, but it actually comes out to an evaluation. And, is this guy really performing, or has Craig been slacking off and not been holding up his end of the deal? And we're going to call him out on it, as you should.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's you got to do it every day. I mean, not literally every day, but you got to live it and breathe it every day.
Okay, so Bill, you've had all these leadership experiences, kind of pretty varied, really. And so now, as as a new person that was just on the line or the floor, right? And now he or she comes in one day and they're the shift supervisor. Congratulations, you've got the team. How are you going to coach them on their leadership journey to start out?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, Steve Jobs or somebody said, like, hey, the best manager are like individual contributors. They just get sick of not putting up with mediocrity, right? And so it's like you're
Yeah,
a lot of times the people you promote those positions are not manager trained managers, right? It's like, hey, you're the best
right.
IC. You can get these other individual contributors to row the boat in the right direction. Let's throw you in there. And I think the first advice is like, hey, nothing's going to happen overnight. Like it's first of all,
Yeah,
it's like times
yeah,
like, hey, you're showing up to work on Monday. You are wearing the supervisor hat and it is game on. You're going to be inundated. It's like, no, it's like when a baby's born, right? Everyone's like, oh my God, it's going to be game day. And it's like, hey, this thing just, at least for me, like that thing just kind of sleeps for like 18 hours a day. I'm like, I don't got to do a lot. Like, okay, I got time to grow into this. And also, I think the first piece would be like, hey, it's like the leadership in itself is a study, is a journey. No one ever stops, and everyone has had to start with their first team lead position of 3 or 4 people, and a lot of this stuff, especially for early on, is man, it's just common sense
yeah,
and just
yeah.
take what you know is right and just kind of work with the team, right? And so it doesn't have to be super hard. Everyone starts somewhere, right? And I think it just starts with just start thinking about it, right? And I think when we're getting ready to promote new individuals, I would ask, like, what's your leadership philosophy, right? And they're like, what is even leadership philosophy? It's like, hey, it's a great question. Let's kind of work through one together. And what does that even mean? And I think it just kind of starts like just starting to think about it, listen to a podcast or something like that, and just start kind of getting your brain thinking about, hey, what are my responsibilities? How do I motivate individuals? How to provide direction, stuff like that, and just start kind of thinking about it on podcasts. And then it's really a journey. I think it's when it comes to leadership, it's definitely one of those things that it's an art and science, right? It's just
Yeah.
something that you got to kind of study, and people are always evolving, right? Everyone's always the good leaders are just constantly evaluating themselves and trying to learn new things and stuff like that. So I'd say it starts small. Nothing's going to happen overnight. And you're going to be able to grow into the role over time. I don't know if that's good advice, but it's something I would
No,
say at
I
least.
love it,
Yeah.
man. Because you're right. Like the three of us, like we've been baked in leadership for
Yeah.
over 20 years, right? So it takes time, right?
Yeah.
Every little bit.
Yeah, and I think that, when I think back to first early leadership positions, we maybe as military officers take it for granted that we had essentially 4 years of leadership training
Mhm.
Yeah.
before we ever got to like our first, what I call my first real job as a platoon leader. It
Yeah.
was, 4 years, whether it was, in your case, West Point, us at ROTC, there was a lot of training that led up to that. Whereas you have a lot of people in the business world that go from individual contributor to leader in a 24-hour time span with no training. And they're probably basing that off their previous experience and what they've seen work well or not. But there is no formalized training in a lot of places. Some places do have it. And then I think the next big step in that leadership journey is going from being a leader to a leader of other leaders. And when
Mhm.
your direct reports are no longer individual contributors but have their own teams, I feel like you have to kind of shift some of your leadership styles a little bit, and a little bit of maybe the philosophy itself doesn't change, but that new leader has to be aware that there's a whole nother level of leadership going on beneath them. Like you mentioned earlier, you don't want to try to circumvent that or cause any harm there, but that's a new aspect for a lot of people. Did you ever run into any situations where that was maybe someone who had experienced leading individuals but not other leaders?
Yeah. I mean, especially on the commercial side, I think myself and then also kind of managing um, some of the down chain. I think it is, and I think when you talk about the Army, there's a lot of preparation. That you spend 4 years in your pre-commissioning source, and you're ready. You're ready to get out of the gates, and just you're begging for the opportunity. And then you kind of leave. You go to the schoolhouse. You come back, and you take the next level, and you go. And so the Army's kind of really they kind of developed the model, the institutional, the organizational, and the educational kind of learning systems for this leader development. And a lot of that doesn't live on the civilian side, right? But yeah, I think it can be really dangerous. I think you get, if someone in a leadership position or organization of people maturing through that growth, I think you got to have this conversation because there's going to be tools that you use at kind of that lowest level of like, follow me, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to get on there. I'm going to show you how to do this thing right.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it. And I'm going to watch you do it. And you're going to sit there and I'm going to show you. And you get higher up in levels, that can actually be very counterproductive because now you're starting to subvert your leaders. Now you're starting to take ownership of a problem that's really not yours, and you get heavily involved. And even on my own experience, when I left Optronic, I think there were 70 employees and rising. When I moved over to Iron IQ, there were about 20 employees, and so like my tools had to change because all of a sudden I had to be much more technical, and I kind of had to like blow off the dust of my kind of like tactical leadership book as well as kind of keep my foot on the strategic side. And so there are different tools that you need to kind of take in consideration because not everything works everywhere. And I think that it kind of just starts with, good organizations and stuff like that will have kind of like, okay, you're now manager of managers. Here's some ideas and tips and techniques and how to's and avoids and stuff like that too. So yeah, I think there's a shift as you kind of progress to that. And before long, like you're not even managing managers, you're just managing relationships and entities almost, right? And so, and all those tools will have to kind of evolve. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's your relationship management, right? It's common sense kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of do what you think is the right thing to do, right? Being a kind
Yeah.
person, managing relationships to help people work together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, I think when our brigade commander, when I was a company commander, Mark O'Donnell later became General O'Donnell. I think we had this commander's book club, right? And you thought you're going to read this, how to eating soup with a knife and all these, all these kind of high.
So it was a very hungry caterpillar.
Yeah, exactly. And the first book he had us read, right, was Making Friends, or was it How to Make Friends and Influence People? Like that was the first book. Is like, and his message is pretty clear. It's like, hey, don't be an a-hole. Yeah. We are in the people business, right? Yeah. It's like that's the first thing my brigade commander is gonna have me right. Is like, yeah, guys, there's a reason. Like I'm stomping my foot here of like what is important to me as a commander, and that made a lot of major impact. How to win friends and influence people. Yeah. That's what it was. Yeah.
So as your organization grows, is there anything that any tools or frameworks you use to help identify new leaders, or anything that you use to help develop leaders in your organization?
Yeah, no, it's great. I think one of the things is having those conversations with those people are kind of starting to show potential, right? Having those conversations really, hey, have you ever thought about leading people? And there are people out there like, don't try to make a pig fly here and not calling people pigs or something. Like, brother, they do not want to manage people. They love doing their own thing. And sometimes the worst thing you could do is like straddle them with all this responsibility and anxiety stacks up. So there's definitely times that, and there's some people's like, I don't think you're going to like it. You don't think you're going to like it, but I think you're actually going to be great for it. And you got to kind of coach them through and kind of get them mentally prepared for that. So I think it starts with having those conversations with people that are kind of starting to show promise. And even, you might not have a role for him right now, and it doesn't have to be 2 days before you're making a selection. It's like you hire this new guy, especially with blah blah. He's like, just tell me your futures and what are your dreams and ambitions here, right? There's talk about one-on-ones and stuff like that, and that's definitely a conversation. Hey, where do you want to be in 5 years? It sounds like a cheesy question. Do you want to lead people? Do you want to be a individual expert? Do you want to make a bunch of money and just be retired and living in? And like all those things are important. And as a leader, it's important to know where they want to go. It's like, hey, I know this guy. He wants to just be the best in his field in data science, and that's his life's mission. It's like, okay, well, maybe I won't straddle him with a department right now. Sometimes organizational needs will necessitate that, but I think it's having those conversations with those people early and kind of identify them. A lot of people that you'll approach, like I've never even thought of this. Like I never thought I'd be in the realm of being an individual or a manager of these technical people, and just kind of cultivating that thought. And I think you can get a lot of people to kind of start thinking about it and actually be interested in it for sure.
Thank you.
Hopefully, I'm answering some of these questions, Greg. I'm just kind of giving you guys a shotgun blast and hopefully generally kind of hit what you guys are getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. I've really enjoyed it because one has sparked other ideas of things that that we haven't talked about at all, and then just getting the different perspective. Because as much as we try to stay objective, we're going to have our own bias on things, and so I appreciate being able to hear a different perspective. Most of the companies I deal with here are manufacturing, traditional, but still vastly different than a startup. And so being able to hear your perspective on this and seeing what correlates and what doesn't, it's awesome.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's also like a little, my sample size is like 3, right? I've done military, I've done like 2 startups, right? And it is very startup bias. And I think there's a lot of things that might apply to startups. And I was going to ask you guys, and whether you guys throw this in, but it's like, on the engagements you've had with other companies, I remember one of the things people said, hey, some companies love the idea of the family moniker, like, hey, we're a family here. We care for each other. We drive. Some organizations like get away with that, like we're the Netflix kind of style, like we're a team. Everyone's got to play the field. You got to have the best first baseman, the best pitcher on the field. And if they're not living up, cut them, right? Like,
Yeah.
have you dealt with those paradigms before, Craig?
So
Or
I
Andrew?
ran into it a few times where
Yeah.
I think everybody defaults to the family model, at least in their mind. They think, oh, we're a family, I'm going to take care of my team. But then I've asked a few leaders, well, have you ever fired a family member?
Yeah.
And they go, well, no. And I'm like, well, but you have fired somebody here, right? And they're like, well, yeah. They're like, but that's different. And I'm like, well, it's not a family then.
Yeah.
I tell people it's more like a hockey team. It's competitive. You want somebody who's at times willing to fight.
Yeah.
But if they do not perform and uphold the standards, it's not because I don't like this person. It's because they didn't uphold the standards. Then we may have to let them go. But me personally, while the idea of family sounds good initially, I think when you really dig into that, it can be, I don't know if problematic's the right word, but it can be challenging because family is like unconditional. Like no matter what, I'm going to take care of them. That's not the case in a business environment if you want to be sustainable long term. That's just Craig's 2-cent opinion, but
Well, and that can be hard to do, right? I mean, family or not, it can be hard to deliver, bad news, especially as much as we talk about, leadership is a personal interaction, right? And so now you're saying you're going to have to go tell this person, you know what, you're no longer a good fit for this company. We're going to have to part ways. Like that's a tough conversation to have, but you've got to do it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I remember thinking about that a lot, right? Like everyone loves the family. Like, hey, you got each other, you care for each other. Like we're all going to get through thick and thin. And I've always liked the sports team mentality, right? And people's like, well, it's like you just got to cut people if they're not good. It's like, no, I mean, yeah, but there's a lot of good things that come with that team metaphor, right? Of like,
but you retrain them first.
Yeah.
You try to solve the problem long before, like, that's the last resort. It's not like you're just going to cut somebody immediately.
Yeah.
So,
sorry I always, I started thinking about that too. I think one of the things that I think was one of the kind of areas that were like most new to me on a startup and business management role is this idea of, especially different from the military, is the idea of hiring, firing people, right? And I think that is not really a tool set you have holistically as a commander or in the Army. You do kind of like you can chapter, but that's a month-long process. You don't know who's going to show up in your formation when the new privates come into on the bus, right? Like, somebody farms about, they just show, hey, like you're on. So you don't really have, elite units and stuff like that, much different. But I think from the line where a lot of us came from, and it's like, thinking this whole hiring and firing and managing is just like this whole new thing that's not really taught in the military. There are good aspects of like, we teach, coach, and mentor, all this stuff. If you have somebody trouble, like it's that leader's responsibility. And that was one of the things that we brought over is like, hey, where's Jim? Why is he not showing up? Well, I don't know. Well, he's like your guy, and he keeps failing in. Like, I'm looking at you, like manager, right? And like, well, I don't know. It's his problem, right? Like, it's like, no. Like, it's on your team, man. Like, you go be a leader, right? And so,
well, yeah, but that's right though, right? Because like now that Jim's out, that directorate is not producing, right?
Yeah,
or not producing at pace.
Yeah.
So that's a problem.
Yeah.
What are you doing about it, leader?
Yeah, and I think, and it was. So we brought some tools up, but the whole idea, like the hiring could be really, really tough. There are stuff to be done. It's like, hey, if we clearly set expectations but and giving this person an opportunity to succeed, you absolutely got to take that stuff in. But I think eventually it's like, hey man, we got to make a business decision here. Like this is a team. The first baseman keeps flubbing the ball. We got to make a decision here. And so, but yeah, I think that was just another kind of component that is much different, civilian versus military. Some similarities and stuff like that, but pretty interesting.
And I think that's correlates very well with the values you kind of talked about earlier, right? Are you upholding our standard, right? And
Yeah.
it may be, like you kind of brought up a little bit earlier, that they are just not fit for that role. Maybe after talking with them, right? And like I said, firing person is the last step.
Yeah.
So maybe before that, you start picking up the problem, you can maybe find a different role for them. So not necessarily jumping straight to you're out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And especially, and I think, another thing is like playing to people's strengths. Like, hey, why are you struggling in this role? Like, hey, I am just not that good at doing X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, let's find something with that. And I'm going to play to your strength versus trying to overcome your weakness. And I think there's a lot of discussions in leadership forums about that. And I think that's very true too. Is like, hey, find out what people are good at. Let's find opportunities that can play to their strength versus you have to fix this or you're not going to be successful in this role.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have that luxury, sometimes it's a great choice to have.
Yeah, because I've heard before, no matter how good of a coach you are, you'll never coach a fish to climb a tree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it is like, but they're great at swimming, so just give them a swimming job.
Give a swim role.
Best swimmer in the organization, right? And I think those are sometimes the most rewarding things where you see kind of someone struggle and you kind of make some tweaks on duties, responsibilities, and stuff like that. And everyone's playing to their strengths. And man, that fish is swimming and he's happy and he or she's crushing it, right? So there's absolutely something to be said about that.
Well, before we let you go here, Bill, I am gonna tell a little story about you.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So there we were, right? Climbing down a mountain in Alaska. You might know where this is going, Bill.
Oh yeah, I think so. This is a story of resilience.
Yeah. Just speaking about resilience. So down climbing, you remember the name of the mountain, Bill?
It was Item Peak, wasn't it?
Item Peak, that's right.
Yeah.
So we were 4 miles up this mountain, and on our way down, in our mountaineering boots and skis, trying with 40, 50-pound packs on, which now that I say it out loud doesn't really sound like a great idea. But so I managed to break my ankle, right? Get twisted up and fall over, and my foot is still in my boot that is now upside down. And we are 4 miles out from the truck. Then we had to get into the truck and then drive 3 hours to the hospital. So I could barely stand up. I could not carry my pack at all, let alone another 4 miles. And Bill picks me up, helps me get on my feet, right? Helps me take my pack off. And about the time our other buddy comes skiing back up, he was ahead of us. So he comes back up kind of around the bend. Like, hey, what's taking you guys so long?
Yeah. If Andrew would have got, he would have killed him. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. You were pissed. Yeah.
So Bill, the rest of the way down the mountain, he carries my backpack and his own all the way back down to the truck. And this is 4 miles, right? These are 50-pound packs each, right? And so I'm kind of scooting along behind and go, ooh. I
remember the whimpers more than anything. Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is just a testament to Bill, right? Because I mean that was no joke, getting that far down with those packs back to the truck, and then listening to me cry about my broken ankle the whole way.
Just whining. I wouldn't stop whining. Oh, my ankle's broken. That's right. Yeah. It's been a while since we've done stuff like that, though. My goodness.
So point is, listeners, you need to listen to this guy. He's knows what he's talking about. He'll carry your pack for you if you break your ankle and you're a weak little boy like me. So
yeah. Man.
So thanks, Bill. Thanks for being on the podcast and sharing some of your leadership journey. I think it's brought a really good and new perspective for us here.
Yeah. And thank you guys. I think it's always a kind of a journey. It just starts with talking about it and just start thinking about it, right? And it sounds like super easy, but just having the conversations and having the dialogue, and it's a never ending journey, man. So no, I appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with you guys.
We appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it.
Y'all have a good one.
As always, take these lessons, use them, and spread them. Everyone is welcome in the cohort.
Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe for more, and drop us a line at commandpostcohort.com to request a specific topic.
We'll see you next time on the cohort.